This is part one of the lecture notes on invertebrates. Um, we already had our chapter on animal diversity, so we've learned the different groups of invertebrates, but we'll just go into a little more detail. There we go. I couldn't get it to go to the next slide. Okay, so the first animal that we learned in the last chapter was the sponge, and the reason for that is because the sponge is the simplest animal. It is the only animal that has no tissues. It belongs to the phylum Porifera. But here you can see a little bit more about the cells that form the sponge. There are cells called choanocytes. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a protozoan called a choanoflagellate that looks almost identical to the cell choanocyte. And it is very widely believed that the choanoflagellate evolved into the choanocyte cells of the sponge. So what happens as far as the filter feeding goes is that, okay, you see the body of the sponge here. The water filters in through the pores in the sponge. So it doesn't go out of the pores, it goes out of the opening at the top called the osculum. The cells that are lining the inside are moving the water across the surface by their flagella. So the choanocytes, the purpose is to help filter feed, to help filter particles from the water. And then we have cells called amoebocytes that delivers nutrients to cells and differentiates into other cell types. It's called an amoebocyte because it moves like an amoeba. It has the pseudopod movement. There are cells called lophocytes or colonocytes, which secrete collagen. This is an egg because a sponge is capable of sexual reproduction. And the sclerocyte has spicules in it composed of silica, which is similar to glass. The body of the sponge is called the mesohele, and the inside of the sponge is called the spongocoel. Then we move on to the cnidarians, the phylum Cnidaria. If you remember with the cnidarians, there were several examples: the jellyfish, the Portuguese man of war, the sea anemone, and the coral. And all of these are marine or saltwater cnidarians. There are some freshwater cnidarians. They're called hydra. All cnidarians are predators. They all have stinging cells that contain a toxin that paralyzes the prey. So this shows you the actual cell called a cnidocyte. And within that cnidocyte is a nematocyst. And within that nematocyst is a thread and a barb. And it's kind of like a trigger mechanism. Whenever this projection here touches an organism that's also swimming, in the ocean or in the lake alongside the cnidarian, it triggers that. It's like a spring-loaded mechanism, and it triggers the barb to come out, and the thread and that barb injects the toxin into the prey and paralyzes the prey, and then the jellyfish or whatever is able to consume it. So there are two different body plans for cnidarians. We know cnidarians have, we know that jellyfish have like a bell shape, and we know sea anemones have tentacles that stick up, that project up. Um, so the body plan that's like a jellyfish is called the medusa. It's a bell-shaped body plan. And then the body plan where the tentacles kind of point up, that's called the polyp body plan. A jellyfish has the medusa body plan for most of its life anyway, and a sea anemone and a coral and a hydra, all of those have the polyp body form. Um, and the cnidarians have two tissue layers, two membrane layers or two tissue layers, and then a jelly-like mesoglia between the layers. So in the medusa, here's where the mesoglia is. It's the gray area. And the tissue layers are called endoderm and ectoderm. There's only two tissue layers in cnidarians. Um, There are some cnidarians that are polymorphic. That means many forms. That means that some are polyps and some are medusa. Some have the polyp form and some have the medusa form. Um, this is showing you one called a gastrozoid and a gonozoid. They're different. They're different forms. This one is a polyp, and these forms are more like the medusa. The class, and now all we've done so far is phylum. And with the sponges, we just stayed with phylum Porifera and we didn't learn any classes. But now what we're doing is we're moving from the phylum Cnidaria, we are going to cover the different classes within the phylum. The first class within the phylum Cnidaria is called the Anthozoa. And an example of an anthozoa is a sea anemone. The tentacles stick up, so it's the polyp body form. There is a gastrovascular cavity. This is the first time we've seen this term. The gastrovascular cavity is a common area for digestion. That's the gastric part, and vascular would be circulation. They don't really have blood, but fluid that circulates the nutrients. That would be the vascular part. So basically their cardiovascular system and their digestive system is one altogether. There's no separation of those body systems. This is a Portuguese man of war, and it's in the class Scyphozoa. It does have a gastrovascular cavity. Of course, all of them do. And this one shows you that it only has one opening for the mouth, and that same opening is considered the anus. So one opening for food, one opening for waste. And it's the same here. It just says mouth, but it's just one opening in all of these cnidaria. Okay, so that's the Scyphozoa, the Portuguese man of war. And then here's the life cycle of a typical cnidarian. So you can see the sexual reproduction of the cnidaria. So first of all, you have a medusa body form. Even if the cnidaria is a polyp for most of its life cycle, it can take on a medusa body form in order to reproduce. The medusa is the reproducing structure. And so the medusa will contain sperm and eggs, and the sperm from one organism will fertilize the eggs of another organism, and that forms a zygote. So this is very similar to what we see with human reproduction. Sperm fertilizes egg, and then the zygote grows into a planula larva. That larva grows into a polyp, and then that polyp grows into a budding polyp, and sometimes it spends most of its life as a polyp, like a sea anemone, and then sometimes it goes through a stage called ephyra and becomes the medusa body form. So it just depends on the cnidaria. This is another cnidaria, very, very toxic. You can see how small they are. Extremely, extremely toxic, deadly. This is called the cubozoa because it's like a little tiny jellyfish. It has the medusa body form, but it is more cubic shaped. Hydra, it is in the class Hydrozoa, and this is a Hydra. And you know what? I'm not going to go back and re-record this, but I think I told you that this is a Portuguese man of war. I think the Scyphozoa is something different. Um, I'm going to pause this so I can come back and tell you the correct. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I do apologize. I'm going to go backward if it will allow me to. I'm trying. I'm trying. I'm trying. Um, Previous. Okay, maybe that'll work. Okay, I'm going to go back to the class Anthozoa. The class Anthozoa does consist of sea anemones and coral. Okay, we already talked about that, and that was correct. The class Scyphozoa, these are the true jellyfish. And I just looked at this organism. I haven't really ever seen one before, and I assumed it was a Portuguese man of war. It doesn't look like the jellyfish that I see. Um, but these are the true jellyfish, the true jellyfishes in the class Scyphozoa, and they have the medusa body form. And then we have the class Cubozoa, which is like a jellyfish, but it's extremely toxic, more toxic than um, even the larger jellyfish are. And its body is a medusa, but it's shaped like a cube, kind of. Then the Hydrozoa is interesting because this is a freshwater hydra in picture D, and it has the polyp body form. And then picture B is a Portuguese man of war. I saw this, and that's the reason why I realized I was wrong, because I knew that was a Portuguese man of war. And that actually is a colony of polyp body forms. So it's more related to a hydra than it is to a jellyfish. Now we're going to move on to another phylum, phylum Platyhelminthes. The word part platy means flat, and helminthes means worm. So these are the flatworms. Flatworms include flukes, which can be parasites, um, tapeworms, and what you're looking at here is a planaria, which is harmless. I don't see it labeled, so I'll write it. Okay, but what you can see is that there's some more complexity going on here than what we had with the Cnidaria. The Cnidaria only had 2 tissue types. The Platyhelminthes have 3 tissue types. So they have an endoderm, an ectoderm, and then in the middle they have a mesoderm. But they are, if you were to cut through their body, there is no body cavity that houses organs like what we have, like an abdominal cavity that houses organs. They're just solid all the way through. But they do have some interesting systems going on here. They have cerebral ganglia containing eye spots that are sensitive to light, and they have nerve cords that run down each side with ladder-like nerve fibers that extend across the body. So there's definitely a nervous system, a very primitive nervous system. We still only have a gastrovascular cavity and one opening that serves as the mouth and the anus. But they do have an intestine, a structure called an intestine, and a pharynx, which both of these would be part of the digestive cavity. So we are getting more complex for sure, and starting to see body systems. These structures in green here, flame cells, they represent kind of a primitive excretory system, kind of like what we have a urinary system. And then this is the phylum Rotifera, which contains animals called rotifers. They're very interesting to watch if you've ever seen a video of rotifers. And they have 2 openings, so that's something new.